in the chat. So please let us know where you are connecting from. I would love to see where you are. If you have any questions or anything that you want to share during this conversation, please just feel free to add your questions, your comments, feedback, resources, anything else that you want to share with the community. Share that in the chat. All right. So without further ado, I'm just going to invite all our panel members to join us. I promise you it's going to be an amazing conversation. We have a great list of questions prepared for you. But of course, since you're here, let us know in the chat of any questions you want to ask to the panel. So I'm going to be welcoming everybody. Dalia, here it is. Oh, there it is. Tabitha, Laba, Regina, Emmanuel. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. So excited to see you all. And I'm going to ask you a favor, actually, as we go on with the conversation. If you can keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. Right now, all of you are muted. That would be great so that we avoid as much as possible any background noise. And when you're ready to speak, just make sure that you unmute yourself. So thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this conversation. For those of you who are tuning in, here we have lead ambassadors and advisors representing Lisbon, Madrid, Hyderabad in India, Dublin in Ireland, and Lagos, Nigeria. So you can see how diverse this group of people is as part of our Global Ambassadorship Program. So let's begin with the beginning, some quick round of introductions. So I'm going to go clockwise to make it simple. Dalia, you're first on my screen. Yeah, you got the lucky number, right? So, so if you can just say a little bit about you, who you are, where you are, and anything else that you want the community to know about you.
Sure. So I'm Dalia Turner. I am, in my professional life, the Chief People Officer for Rake Tech. I am a Canadian who lives in Portugal, and I am the lead ambassador here for Transform, and really thrilled to be part of the global network that is Transform.
Thank you so much for being here, and super excited. By the way, I didn't do this before, but I'm going to do it right now. I didn't turn on our names, which they will show now. There we go. I'm like, there's something. I've done this so many times on StreamYard, and I was like, there's something missing on the screen, but I don't know what it is. And now I got it. It was the names. Thank you, Dalia, and welcome to the panel. Tabitha, let's go with you.
Great, thank you. So my name is Tabitha. I am originally from Venezuela. I live in Madrid. I moved 10 years ago or so. And I've been working in HR for the past 15 years, but dedicating exclusively to diversity, equity, and inclusion the past 2 years only. And I am doing a lot of consulting and teaching in several schools. And I am also leading, along with two other great female colleagues, the local Transform chapter. We are doing a lot of events. We are very excited to connect with the community. So I'm also very excited to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Tabitha, and Venezuelan like me. So it's phenomenal. Thank you so much for being here. Lava, let's go with you.
Yes, thank you so much, Enrique, and thank you to the panelists. I'm excited to share space and learn from all of you today. So my name is Laba Nawaz. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am dialing in from Hyderabad, India today. I'm the lead ambassador for Transform Hyderabad chapter, and I also work as a program manager in the DEI and employee experience space at Eventbrite. Very excited to be here and talk through this topic.
Thank you, Laba. Do you have any Venezuelan DNA somewhere in there or nothing? I mean, we don't know, right? We don't know for sure. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Regina, let's go with you.
My pleasure, and thank you, Enrique, and the panel. I'm looking forward as well to exchange some ideas. So my name is Regina Walsh. I'm originally from Bulgaria, but I've been living in Ireland for the last 12 years. I'm an organizational psychologist, former global recruiter from LinkedIn and Airbnb, and in the last 5 years, I have been a business lecturer and a remote talent advisor for a number of companies. the I and B are basically part of what I cover in terms of my services with different small and medium-sized organizations. So I'm really excited about this topic. We literally just opened the Dublin chapter of Transform. So we are on a mission to get our board of advisors and ambassadors. So if anyone is interested, please do not hesitate, reach out to me and we can get the ball rolling.
Thank you so much, Regina. I'm so excited to have you with us today. And last but not least, Emmanuel, how are you, my brother? It's good to see you again. It's been a long time.
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good, Enrique. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I'm pleased to meet everyone on the event, all the other speakers. So my name is Emmanuel Michael. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm currently the founder of HR with EM. I'm a certified leadership and a career success coach. So I help new leaders or experienced leaders who have challenge in improving their performance at work to achieve their goals, okay? Basically just to identify whatever potential they have and make sure they maximize it. That's basically what I do currently. So I'm also an advisor to Transform here in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm excited to be part of the team. We already have some programs that we want to roll out from now till December, and I'm sure for those of you who are watching, stay tuned for what we have to roll out before the end of the year.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for being here. And some of our chapters, some of the Transform chapters, they have the ways to communicate vary, of course, but in the Lagos, Nigeria chapter, they communicate via WhatsApp. And I am part of that WhatsApp group, and it's the most fun thing. So it's not just building the chapter; it is a fun space to be in and to be part of all these conversations that you, Emmanuel, and the team in Lagos are having. So thank you so much for that. Well, once again, everybody, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And we're gonna dive right into the topic in a second. I just want to once again acknowledge our live audience. And of course, our audience post-event. If you're watching this video post-event, thank you so much for watching. And for those of you who are connected live right now, please let us know in the chat where you're connecting from. And if you have any questions for me, for the panel members, please feel free to post that question in the comment box. So let's begin with the beginning. And the beginning of the chat of the conversation in the panel is pretty basic. I would love for you to define what is inclusion and belonging, but I'm going to add a little layer of complexity to this question. Why is inclusion and belonging important for companies that are operating in a global marketplace, in a global context? So those two questions, defining inclusion and belonging, and why is it important for companies that are operating in this global marketplace. So anybody who wants to just go first, please feel free to do so, and then we just take it from there. So anybody just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, let me go first.
Let's go, Emmanuel, and then we go with Tabitha.
Okay. So when you talk about inclusion and belonging, so let me start with why is it important? Okay, the benefits. There are three major benefits that I see with inclusion and belonging. So number one is to drive innovation. Okay? When you want to drive innovation, you need to include different category and strata of people who have different perspectives. Okay? That would help to bring those different ideas together, and you'll be able to create something new. So that is why it's very critical for organizations to adopt the principle or policy of inclusion and belonging. Then the second thing is employee engagement. Okay, when you create an environment where you allow different people, say for instance, the previous companies that I've worked for, the company headquartered in a different country, and you have operations in almost 20, 30 countries across the globe. Okay, so you have people coming from different environments. Okay, so bringing all of us together creates that sense of being valued. So we're not focusing just on one particular area of the operations of the company where it's situated, but we're tapping from everyone. So everyone feels valued, feel respected, and somehow it helps to boost the morale, of the people. And then thirdly, the third reason for me why it's important is business success, okay? Companies with inclusive cultures, as has been seen from several research, okay, are most likely to achieve better financial performance. And aside from achieving better financial performance, you also see that they're able to attract top talent. I remember in one of the companies where I worked, where we had to attract people living with disability. Okay? So it gave us an edge. The company was able to attract the interest of a particular social donor who has interest in people living with ability, and they began to support our operations. So for me, those are the three major things that I see are critical when you, as an organization, decide to project or adopt the inclusion and belonging principles. And then what exactly does it really mean? So when we talk about inclusion, for me, the way I understand inclusion is making sure that people in the organization, irrespective of the different generations, okay, you are bringing them together to make sure that all the different generations are represented, all the different genders are represented, so everyone has an opportunity for them to be able to air their voice. And then when we talk about belonging, for me is that when you bring all these people together, are they able to express themselves freely without any judgments? Okay? When they're able to express themselves and contribute to the success of that particular organization, to the discussion, to the product, to the solutions that we're developing, or how we make the organization better, then they can now begin to feel that I belong to this particular society, I belong to this environment because I'm allowed to express myself. I'm not afraid to say that the environment is not comfortable for me to be able to speak. So those for me are my thoughts around that subject.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And your response has triggered a burning question that I'm going to try to appease for a little while we respond this first question, and then I'm going to go to that one. So I'm going to save it for the next round. Tabitha, I'm going to go with you. Defining inclusion and belonging, and why it is important for companies operating in a global context, in a global marketplace.
Of course. Well, Emmanuel already mentioned a lot of the things that I had in my mind, but maybe what I could add is that inclusion for me, it's about making everyone feel valued and respected at all times in the company. So, of course, you create equitable opportunities for everyone to succeed, but you also make sure that everyone feels valued and respected at all times. And regarding benefits, I mean, as I said, Emmanuel already mentioned the most critical probably, but I would also add that for international companies, it's very important to understand the local regulations that are mandatory in different countries regarding inclusion, because you can avoid fines and financial consequences by understanding and knowing the local regulations that are related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those are different in every country. So from that perspective, it's also important to know and work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And finally, it's also an ethical, I also like to think that it's the moral thing to do and the ethical thing to do. I know it's not very popular amongst business people to think about this, but who can say they don't want to include people with disabilities? They don't want to have women and people of diverse backgrounds in the board of leaders. I think it's also about the ethics of it. So yes, everything Emmanuel said, but also that.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that you brought up the word respect to the conversation, right? Which is a word, by the way, and of course what it represents, not just a word, that comes up at the top 3 of the things that people consider the most important in their relationship with their peers, with their leaders, and the reasons why they stay in a company ultimately, right? So thank you so much for bringing that up. Lava, I think you wanted to add something too. I saw you unmuting yourself before. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So yes and yes to Tabitha and Emmanuel, right? It's about creating so what inclusion is, and people need to feel respected and valued. I feel it's also important to understand it's also about creating a safe environment And that is the essence of inclusion, where people feel safe and feel heard and respected and valued. And this is the essence of belonging, where we are trying to create a more equitable, transparent, and fair practices, whether it's with job hiring or promotions or creating any experience within an organization. But having said that, because I sit in India, inclusion can mean different to different people. The concept of inclusion is to celebrate the diversity and the differences that people bring to the table. But if in India, being looked at from a different lens, that you are different, is sometimes not seen in a positive manner. So people tend to bend towards more belonging. So there is no sense of belonging without every single person feeling safe and valued, and that's equity and inclusion for me. And Emmanuel talked about, Tabitha talked about the benefits. I mean, of course, there are linked evidences that it helps with your financial performance and your business because you're investing in people. I also feel in the global context, it's important because you need to collaborate. So you need to understand how people function, how people respond to certain things. It's also important in the global context to understand the cultural competency. And recently, I've seen a trend that speaks about cultural humility versus cultural competency. So I would say for these three reasons, I think in the global context, it's very important to have inclusion and diversity and belonging at the workplace.
Thank you, Laba. That's phenomenal, and I think bringing up the idea of psychological safety and safety in general in the workplace, to be able to feel included and that you belong, is just so powerful. And we can have an entire conversation just on psychological safety as the foundation of inclusion, diversity, belonging, equity, like you mentioned before. Dalia, Radina, do you want to add anything to this question or a response to this question? No? We're all good? All right. So I'm going to jump then to my next question, which I think probably can take us the entire duration of the panel, but I'll ask it either way, right? And I say this because I sit in the United States, and I've put together thousands of events over the past several years, and I have realized that sometimes I am people that I invite inadvertently make the mistake to think that our cultural reality should be the cultural reality of everybody else, right? And then we try to export that reality to other countries that behave completely different, or somewhat different even, but they have their own uniqueness. So my question to you is, given that most companies right now are operating definitely in this global environment, whether because they have employees in other countries or because they are serving customers in other countries, how can those companies keep what makes them unique as a company, what's true, what's their true identity as a company, what's true for their values and their culture, while simultaneously saying, yes, however, in this country they have these differences compared to the way we do things in this country, and we have to account for that to be able to operate in the country or to be able to have employees in the country. How do we do to not export what we do in one country to another, but rather take into account that cultural reality of those other places where we are operating? Dalia, we go with you and then Radina.
Perfect. So Enrique, for me, when I hear you ask the question, I often think that when an individual is coming in and expecting the other person to react the way that they react, that's a bias that the individual has. And I think that you deal with it the same way that you deal with all biases that exist, which is calling it out, making people aware of it, doing the education to talk about where the differences are, and helping to educate employees, managers, leaders on how to be interacting with different people. And I think that it's a great place where people can lean into the company culture, which is around the behaviors that you have at the company that should be the same, but talking about the geographical or the religious or any other behaviors that are going to come in over top that they should be aware of, and how you marry the two together. So talking about, the differences in time, the differences in the way that they're going to respond to hierarchy, the differences that they're going to respond to who's going to speak up in a meeting and who's not, who likes being put on the spot, who's not, things like that. And just raising that awareness, I think helps, because I don't think that anyone's necessarily wanting to export it. I think in a lot of cases, they're just not aware that there is that difference that they should be aware of.
Yeah. I love that. And by the way, it really it's like a spectrum, right? It goes from very, deep cultural things like, religious celebrations in that country or the languages they speak, to the more, I don't want to say this, but, or I don't want to think that it's a mundane thing, but it is, like the time zones, right? Even that, we may think, oh, well, this company is headquartered in this city, therefore everybody has to adapt to this time zone. And hey, for some people, it is a completely different time zone. And, there usually is a window where for both of you, it can be a reasonable time to meet, but sometimes you just have to like think about it and like kind of like be aware, like you're saying, Dalia. So I love that. Radina, please go ahead.
Thank you. And I'm absolutely on the same boat like Dalia. And I genuinely think the book that Erin Meyer wrote down about culture, the culture map, should be part of the library of any and every international manager. The minute they know that they are going to be looking after an international environment or their team is going to be of different cultures, this book needs to be read. And as Dalia mentioned, raising the awareness, that sounds fantastic. Honestly, I don't believe in bias trainings. I don't think they serve a purpose, at least not in Europe. I've been there, I've done them, I've gone through them, and honestly, there needs to be a much deeper work. And as a psychologist, I'm biased in saying that we all have understanding of what global context is, as to Laba's point from the earlier question, but then the local differences matter a lot, not only from legal, tax, and compliance point of view, but also habits, how we do business, how we communicate with one another, how we take feedback on board. These are huge aspects of not only the HR role, the manager's roles as well, and also the individuals. All of us here, mostly I think, are expats, and we've lived in different countries. And every time we get the culture shock, whether we go back to our original country or we move to a new destination, every time we need to adjust, right? The company is not expected to adjust to you. You need to adjust. But on an organizational level, we need to understand what we can do better to avoid, exactly to your point, bringing only one cultural reality and having false expectations that everyone would basically embrace that just because that's the company values. And to bring a real, even real example from Airbnb, one thing that was pretty fascinating to me was that the values of the organization are equally human. And every single person that worked there, and that's very similar to LinkedIn as well. So I probably got lucky. I really got lucky with these two companies. But genuinely, everything that they do, every single policy, every single event, everything was embracing the culture, but also taking into account, well, we are based in Dublin, so incorporate the Dublin culture. Oh, we're based in Berlin, so we incorporate the German culture, as well as everything. To Dalia's point, how we can marry those. And it doesn't require a huge amount of budget or humongous amount of time to build strategy. It does require time, effort, and desire to be better.
Yeah, I love that. And I actually, I always like to talk about the concept of cultural or cultural growth rather than culture fit, right? Cultural growth allows room to say, we think our culture works, but now we are operating in this other market and look at all the amazing things they do. How can that improve our culture, right? Rather than saying, this is the way we are and you got to adapt just to this. So thank you so much for that, Radina. Tabitha, Laba, Emmanuel, do you want to add anything to this question?
I can add one point, right? So there is a belief that everything should be the same for everyone. So to Radhana's point, the Erin Mayer's book, it talks about how it shows you the different sides of two different people turning up, working in the same group, and how they explore the flexibility around it. So that's very important. And of course, there are DEIB strategies set up at the global level. So how do we customize and co-create the DEI and culture initiatives locally is very important. And I believe leaders, we put a lot of responsibilities on leaders, and there is a reason, because we want them to lead by example. Lead, I mean, going back to diversity as well, because though we are talking about inclusion and inclusion and belonging, diversity is still the driver for inclusion. We need to have diverse people on the ground who can lead by example, especially in the leadership and critical roles.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. Oh, Emmanuel, I was going to ask the next question, but please go ahead and then I'll ask the next question.
Okay, so what I just wanted to add just a little bit is an example. I remember there's one time we were having a meeting, okay, a global meeting with one of the companies where I was working. And then suddenly, because the person who was leading the meeting comes from a part of the country where they are communicating, our normal communication should be in English. But somehow, in the course of communicating English, the person will now switch to their local native language, and start speaking. So, and then the person just went on for a very long time. I said, we can't even understand what you're saying. Please, we need to speak English. So that consciousness, there has to be consciousness amongst the people who are working together to know that, okay, because we're a diverse group, because I'm used to speaking in English and suddenly switching to my mother tongue, there is need for me to be conscious not to switch to my mother tongue, because there are others on this call who are likely not going to understand what I'm going to say, and they'll be asking for interpretation. So that consciousness is very key to ensure we don't export it and say, okay, this is the way we do it. So we understand that there are people on the call who speak different languages. So that's what I wanted to chip in.
Yeah, thank you for that. And once again, it goes back to the fact that there are complex things in building a culture of inclusion and belonging at a global scale, but there are very, quote unquote, simple, mundane things that, as mundane as they may be, a lot of people don't do them, but they make a huge difference. The time zone, the language that you speak, so that people can understand you and you understand them. Those things may sound like really low lift kind of things. A lot of people still don't do them, but they do make a big, big difference. So thank you so much for that. Let me ask you my next question, and I'm going to use this idea of the role of leaders. And I want to ask you, how can leaders promote and role model inclusivity in the workplace? But I'm going to extend that question in the following way. I know that leaders have a lot of responsibility to role model these behaviors, and a lot of things. A culture of inclusion and belonging has to also be embraced and role modeled by senior leadership. But I also believe that every one of us can do that on a regular basis. So every individual person, whether that person is a leader or not, they do have a responsibility to also, in their own behaviors, role model inclusivity. So how can leaders do it? How can all of us do it in our everyday interactions or actions in the workplace? How can we role model inclusivity? So anybody, just maybe Tabitha was
okay.
Oh, Emmanuel, then we go with you, and then in round.
Okay, so let me just give one example. Communication. It's one way that we can model this inclusivity. So there's need for us to not just emphasize the role of transparent and inclusive communication, because it's very key. The way we communicate, how we communicate, will determine whether we're bringing people together or we are creating that division. So it's very, very key. And then the other thing, again, we need to look at is when we talk about listening, okay, we need to actively listen when people are speaking. And in the course of actively listening, we also need to show empathy, give different people within the environment where we find ourselves the opportunity to be able to contribute in whatever decision that we want to make. So when a decision is to be made on a particular subject, it's not just railroaded towards one direction and just one outspoken person within the team who is able to make that contribution. So giving people the opportunity to be able to contribute, and as a leader, actively listening Look, as people are speaking, try to identify those that are not even able to say things, people who are reclined into their shelves. See how you can pull them out to become part of the meeting and get everyone across the table to contribute. So that was one example of how we can model this inclusivity. And I talked about one of the companies where I work. So we had a project, okay? And in this project, instead of selecting people just from one particular region of the globe, we made sure there are people from different parts of the globe. So you're bringing people together. So that's another way to model this inclusivity and belongingness that we're talking about. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah. Thank you, Emmanuel. And I like that you put responsibility on the leader, but also you put responsibility on the rest of us. I mean, if I go to a meeting and I see, the same group of people is the same group of people that is always talking, and the same group of people is the same group of people that is always quiet, I can be very intentional about doing something about that, right? As a leader or as an individual. And so I think that's phenomenal. Thank you, Emmanuel. Tabitha, we go with you. And then anybody who wants to jump in, of course.
So I think in my experience, one of the things that often prevents leaders and individuals to advocate and model inclusive behaviors is many of them are afraid to make a mistake. And because of that, they prefer not to do anything. So they don't, they are not canceled. They are not facing any consequences of a mistake, etc. So I think that one way all of us can take a step further and really model inclusive behaviors is just accepting that we will all at some point make mistakes. We cannot, none of us can know all of the realities and be absolutely aware of every sensitivity that there is out there. So knowing that we will all make mistakes, it's an invitation to prepare to show up when that happens. So it's not that important that I say something that might hurt someone without being conscious of it. It's what do I do when that happens? How do I show up for that person? If I know that I'm going to make mistakes and I know how to show up, I'll be more secure in my intentions to model these inclusive behaviors.
Oh my gosh, I love that so absolutely much. Because I don't know about you, and maybe you Tabitha, or anybody else can comment on this, right? But I feel that a lot of people want to do the right thing, but they are putting so much pressure on themselves to do the right thing that they feel that making a mistake will set them back, to the underground of, emotional understanding and emotional intelligence, and they prefer just to be in the background, quiet, not asking questions. I remember seeing this recently, this commercial of a transgender woman in a store, and it was an Asian owner of the store. I think probably the person was Chinese, and he asked her, like, why do you dress like that? And she said, well, because I feel like home like this. And the guy was like, oh, wonderful. And they became great friends. This is a part of it's a show, by the way. But if he had been afraid of even asking the question, right, or what her reaction, this transgender woman, was going to be, maybe they wouldn't have had the conversation or the relationship that they ended up having after that. So I think it's just so powerful that you're saying, if you want to role model, if you want everybody to embrace these behaviors, you have to role model the understanding that people can make mistakes as they traverse this journey of learning and understanding. And I think that is just so beautiful and powerful. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Laba, I think you were unmuting yourself to say something, and then we go with Dalia.
Yes, I wanted to add that inclusion and belonging can start on a very small level as well. We have people on board, great, but how do we make them feel invited, make them feel welcomed? Maybe, start with welcoming the new employees on your team meeting or the global meeting, giving them space to introduce themselves to the broader team, their background, where are they coming from. I think that gives them that space to start at least showing up and talking about themselves. Making sure that you are getting the pronunciation right. I suck at it, but I always make sure that I go back and correct it. And I know I keep making the mistakes there. But making the name, getting the pronunciation of the name right. And also, Enrique, you talk about checking in, maybe starting the meetings with check-ins, maybe choose an emoji, how they are feeling. A lot of people might not feel comfortable sharing their emotional state on a broader platform. So maybe using Slido for the anonymous response. Recognizing that each individual on a team is different and brings unique perspective. Maybe a high performer does not feel comfortable speaking up and prefer async or prefer email or Slack to share their thoughts or perspective. So understanding how your team works, the team dynamics, what kind of communication mode they prefer, what hours they want to be reached out. So I think understanding that and creating awareness around is very important. And to Tabitha's point, also whenever you feel the urge to correct a behavior, or you feel that this person is non-professional, maybe pausing and asking ourselves, is this ineffective, or is this different to what I'm not aware about, and go back to understanding if this behavior is coming from a different perspective. And also Emmanuel spoke about active listening. So active listening versus listening to respond. So I think these are small things that can be done on a regular basis and at an individual level, instead of waiting for the leaders to contribute. And of course, leaders' behaviors matter. Leaders, I think they should cut from the agenda driven conversation, and maybe come from a place of authenticity, where they're able to create a place of trust. If I'm a leader and I go and tell my team, hey, you can be free and discuss anything with me, and I might not be feel comfortable sharing that, because I need to trust the credibility of the leaders, the place the leader is coming from. So that's very important, building a trusty environment.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, nobody will come to you with a question or trying to seek some understanding if you have betrayed him, as a leader in the past, right? And I mean, it's just a powerful idea that we have to build trust for all of this to even begin to work, right? So, Lava, thank you so much for that. Dalia, we go with you.
Sure. And Lava, I love those little tips that you gave and the little things that people can do every day. I wanted to build on what Tabitha said, because when you asked the question, the one thing that I've seen, a leader that I worked with that I thought did a really good job was expressively calling it out every time he made a mistake. So as he put a meeting at the wrong time zone, as he called out on someone who felt uncomfortable and they preferred to, answer in writing, he would in the next meeting call out and I did it again, everyone. I inadvertently stepped on a toe again and sharing and making it a place where it was okay to make that mistake, signaling and showing that he was not perfect himself, but also helping to raise that awareness of, hey, if I've stepped on someone's toes, possibly you have also. The other thing that I thought that leader did very well was calling out the elephants in the room and getting the team to think about, have you thought about what this means for people who work from home? Have you thought about what this means for people who are in Asia? Have you thought about what this means for people in the California time zone where that's 6 a.m., and being able to help people think through the decisions they're making, which I thought was really, as a leader, not just showing your awareness yourself, but helping to bring that awareness to others.
Yeah. It sounds a lot like the concept of vulnerability, what you're talking about, right? Being able to be vulnerable, and ultimately, if you do it as a leader, you're role modeling that for others to be able to do the same. So, really appreciate you bringing that up. Radina, do you want to add something? No, Can we begin with you in the next round of a question? Okay, perfect. So, so my next question, very simple. We are, for some reason, it's all building on the previous one, right? And I love that that's the way our organic conversation is going. But we're talking about vulnerability, like Dalia said before. We're talking about building trust. We're talking about some examples in communication. Tabitha mentioned before, we have to be open-minded to the idea that when people are on this journey, they may make mistakes, and if you want to roll inclusivity, you have to understand that those mistakes will happen, and be open about kind of guiding people. But there are there are a bunch of people that really want to have these honest conversations about inclusion and diversity and belonging in the workplace, what they mean for the human, what they mean for the business, and for the success of both, right? Of both business and people. So, so my question to you is, how can organizations, leaders, or for all, is to how can they create safe spaces where people can come forward and say, hey, it doesn't seem like we're building the right level of trust here. It doesn't seem that people can be vulnerable. I've heard from my colleagues that this is happening, but they are not saying it to their leaders. Therefore, we're not doing anything about this. How can we create safety for people to come forward with such messages?
I think if anyone has found the answer to this, they would have been quite rich people as consultants. I think this is a big challenge, and I think Emmanuel mentioned the fact that there are a lot of silos. The bigger the organization, the bigger the silo, and we stick to people that we know, that look like us, act like us. This is normal human behavior. It's not even bias. This is really engraved in how we function as species. It's same with animals. And Lava mentioned a word that goes very well with vulnerability, and the word is authenticity. Mm-hmm. And the expectations of employers that everyone would feel comfortable coming to them, that they just said, it's open door policy, you can come and bring whatever issue you want. No one is going to come with issues to their bosses. I mean, not even Gen Z, which are very opinionated creatures. It has to be top to bottom approach. I don't see it in any other way. And the top needs a lot of coaching. Let's be honest with that. And we spoke about the fear aspect. I think fear is an incredible push as an emotion. It can push us towards good things. It can push us towards bad things as well. And it's okay to experience fear. I don't think why we have put on an absolute cult, on a pedestal, that we always need to be brave, that we always need to be knowledgeable, not to show our vulnerable selves. Particularly for leaders, to create safe space, they need to start with their own vulnerable story. And one story actually two stories, but one that particularly shaped me earlier in my career, even before I was working at Airbnb, was Brian Chesky, the CEO, talking about the struggle and the grind when they started the company, how long it took them to hire their first engineer, how difficult it was. And then most recently, when all companies started laying off their employees, they came with a very emotional letter to all of their employees that really became an example of how things should happen in a company. A big multinational company, a unicorn, that is handling difficult times with compassion, with vulnerability, with really embracing what it means to care for your employees. We're not even talking about packages and how generous they were to their employees, but leaders that are not afraid to say, I effed up, or this is happening. This is happening. This is the reality, and it's difficult for me. It's difficult for everyone else. But ultimately, business is business. And yes, as much as it's difficult, we need to understand that we need to do always the best for the business and the people. So starting with the story, starting with these examples, even sharing all of the times you failed before you became CEO or whatever your role is. It's beautiful, and it empowers people. It empowers different people to speak a bit more about it, because there are areas where talking about diversity is not an option. And I've worked with organizations that, unfortunately, because of certain complicated reasons, location, religion, and everything else, they just can't really talk about diversity the same way like we would talk in the West or in Europe. However, what we brought is, diversity is you and I, we're different. We come with different mind, with different experience. So why don't we focus on the fact that we are different and we can bring all of this know-how to the organization? But let's start with listening. Emmanuel said that with the active listening. So this would be my two kind of approaches for leaders. Start with your story and then listen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I appreciate that you are recognizing that in some specific contexts, right? Some conversations that may be very natural to have in some regions, they may not be as natural to have in others, right? And we have to recognize, for example, that now June is Pride Month, and there's celebrations and recognition and acknowledgement of the journey. But there are countries where it's the way you can talk about this, because of the cultural context, is not the same. And it's we just have to acknowledge sometimes that yes, we wish it was different, but we have to operate in a context that's the reality of that context. And and there's little that you would be able to do at a national scale. Maybe you can do something in your company, but at a national scale will be perhaps more difficult. But anyway, I appreciate that, Radina. Emmanuel, I think you were going to say something.
Okay, just to add on what Radina has shared, aside from the visible leadership support, there is also need to set some sort of ground rules. Okay, so it would be nice for the organization to discuss what these rules are, agree, collectively agree what the rules are, and then make sure it's communicated so everyone knows exactly what's acceptable, what is not acceptable. Because if you don't know what's acceptable and unacceptable, the tendency to keep making mistakes, keep doing the wrong thing will be very high. So there's need to do that. Then in addition, there's also need to ensure that if training is required, okay, maybe they need to bring in some experts to come and share with us how to navigate these challenges within the organization. Then there is need for us to do that. I remember the very first time we hired a person living with disability. So the challenge was for the rest of the team, how are they going to relate with this person living with disability so that they don't feel uncomfortable, They don't show that they are pitying the person's condition, because this person, even though, yes, they have some sort of disability, but they've made themselves available to be able to do the work. So we need to make sure that we provide with that respect, okay, exists between us in the way we deal with this particular person. So if there's need to bring an expert from outside to come and coach us, I think Regina talked about coaching for the leaders, but also need coaching for everyone within the organization on how to deal with some of these issues. So those will be some of my own addition to how we can create that open, safe space.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one thing that I'm picking up on, by the way, is that you said a person living with a disability and not a disabled person. So language matters too, by the way. And I'm incredibly aware of that, because the country where Tabitha and I come from passed a law many 20 years ago or something like that, even forcing a change in the language in which we refer to people that are living with a disability and not as a disabled person. So even in that sense, you build inclusivity just by being aware of the words that you're using to define, a reality or a condition, rather than making that the definition of the person. So I picked up on that, Emmanuel, and I just wanted to say that even in that, we live inclusion and belonging, right? So thank you so much. So my last question for everybody, as we get ready to wrap up this panel, which has been phenomenal, and I appreciate you all for being in this conversation. My last question, and and it will be for everybody. Maybe we go on a round like we did at the beginning. Is how can organizations and leaders address and prevent discrimination, biases, microaggressions, harassment, or any of these awful things that happen to people in the workplace? How can they address and prevent that in a global environment where, even picking up on language use, for example, can be very complicated if you're not aware of the reality of that particular country? So Tabitha, we'll start with you, and then maybe we move, let's move counterclockwise from you after your response. So Dalia, you will be next. Tabitha, go ahead.
Great. So building upon what Emmanuel said earlier about making clear what's acceptable behavior and what's not unacceptable behavior, I think that if you really want to build a culture of inclusion where harassment and microaggressions are, if not eradicated, at least diminished, the best in the best possible scenario, I think it has to be very clear what's acceptable and what's not for everyone. We need to have policies to let people know exactly what is considered microaggression in this environment, in this culture, in this company. And we also need to give them tools to show up when that happens. So if I am the initiator of a microaggression, for example, and someone points that out and calls me out, what can I do? Or not, they shouldn't even call out the person, actually. It should be the behavior that needs to be called out. So what should I do? What can I do to show up if I am the initiator? What can I do if I'm an ally and I am in the presence of a microaggression, or I know about someone that is living with under a situation of harassment? So we don't leave that responsibility to the person that is actually suffering the microaggression or the target of that harassment. So I think that would be my 2 cents, to really make it clear and help people with a procedure or a policy that allows them to know exactly what should they do when that happens.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Dalia, we'll go with you.
Sure. So I think I'm gonna build on what Tabitha said. I think, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to prevent these things. They're going to happen. The mistakes are going to happen. And so I think it's about creating that environment in which people can communicate when they feel that something has happened that either doesn't work for them or doesn't work for others, and be able to have that space where they can call out that something has happened. And then, more importantly, how the others, including management, including leaders, are responding to that. Because I think, coming back to what we talked about with leaders making mistakes, the mistakes are going to happen. And to what Tabitha said, it's how individuals respond when that happens. And I read a really good article recently that talked about just the term microaggressions, which I absolutely loved, because oftentimes the people that are doing it, they don't mean to be aggressive. And it's not a small thing that's happening, but that doesn't, whether they meant to or not, whether it was intentional or not, it doesn't stop the impact that it has on that other individual. So being able to create an environment where the person can call it out and then people can deal with it and move forward is what I think needs to happen.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and in a multicultural global environment, that becomes even more sensitive, right? Because there can be things that are like small, like mispronouncing somebody's name, or making a joke out of their accent. These things may sound like a joke, but if you multiply that several times in a day for anybody, then they are not a joke anymore. They become something that impacts their confidence, perhaps even, right? So I appreciate that you bring in that idea of microaggressions and what it means in the global context. Emmanuel, then Radina, and then Laba, and that's how we end.
Okay, so I would like to build on what Tabitha and Dalia has just spoken about, to say that for anything to succeed in an organization, we need to measure it. So we need to define exactly what we want to see, and then begin to measure it, track and see how we're doing against that particular KPI that we've set. So that's one critical thing we need to do. Then secondly, continuous improvement. Like Dalia said, the mistakes will still occur even though we've defined what we want to see. But as the mistakes occur, what steps or actions are we taking? Okay, so we need to be able to outline what we need to do to continuously improve our inclusion efforts. Okay, maybe feedback loops. So when an issue or a situation, an incident takes place, what do we do? How do we address it? And then from time to time, there's need to carry out some sort of audits, just to check. And then we've talked about policies. So there's need to make sure that we have policies in place that addresses some of these challenges. Then accountability is also very key. We need to stress the importance of accountability at all levels across the organization. I think it's Dalia, one of us talked about top to bottom. So accountability has to be top to bottom, not just stopping at a particular level. So these are some of the things for me that I would recommend that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Definitely accountability. These things don't happen just by, just by good luck, right? You build them intentionally, but you also keep people accountable for building the positive, but also taking care of the negative, right? So, or the things that happen that should not be happening. So thank you for that, Radina. And then Laba.
I'm quite solution oriented as a person, and I want to bring it to the next level. I do agree with everything that has been said, but unfortunately, just having the right policies, it's not enough anymore, not in the world that we live in. And I believe there was an experiment a couple of years ago, I think it was from the University of Arizona, where they launched a VR tool that can basically help people understand what microaggression is.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty well-funded project. I don't know how it went, but I'm pretty sure that a few organizations that have really embraced VR as part of their, and augmented reality as well, as part of their training, onboarding, companies, large organizations like Walmart, like Amazon as well, the only way to prevent and potentially ultimately you want to not like teach a lesson, but you want people to understand. To your point earlier, sometimes people don't understand that they are making this thing, and that these comments are not appropriate. The only way, in my opinion, is through experiencing them themselves. To be put in situations where you are in the shoes of a woman, of a person with a disability, of person of color, or anything else, right? To just understand in specific situations how that feels. Because with establishing policies, yes, you are compliant, you have the legal piece ticked, but unless the human understands how it feels, how shaken you can be, I don't think there is a lesson there.
Yeah, it is. Some of these programs include the role modeling, right? And in the role modeling, you are the person who would have experienced that behavior. And yeah, even in the role modeling exercise, it does feel heavy for those who are not the subject of that behavior on a regular basis or on a real life basis, right? So thank you for that. And last but not least, Laba, we're closing with you.
Yes. I feel just being passionate about creating a safe environment is not enough. Building a safe environment into the culture and process goes just beyond passion and beyond just talking. It needs resilience and push at every stage. When companies' action do not match its word, it loses credibility both externally and internally, and it also leads to a lack of genuine inclusion. Right now we are in the Pride Month. Last month we just celebrated the Mental Health Awareness Month, but how many of the companies are still talking about mental health, making sure their employees are feeling safe, and taking a break from the taking a mental health break? How many of the companies, apart from just changing the logo on LinkedIn, are doing more than that? And it's also important to understand that while we want to create a safe environment, safety and comfortability are two different things. It's the role of the leaders, the DEI, the people manager, or HR to be able to distinguish when people say that they do not feel comfortable, and hold them accountable for their actions versus not feeling safe and taking actions on that.
Well, that's all this conversation. Laba, to you and to everybody else, this conversation has been phenomenal. Thank you so much, everybody. We are right on time. Thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this. Dalia, Tabitha, Laba, Radina, and Emmanuel, thank you so much for being part of this phenomenal conversation. Everybody tuning in, if you want to learn more about the Transform Global Ambassadorship Program, reach out to us. Go to our online community, plus.transform.us. Find out more. But in the meantime, thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful day and that you've learned a lot from this conversation. So thank you, everyone. It was great to see you all. Have a beautiful rest of your day and week. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.